The first occasion on which Mr. Libby discussed it with Judith Miller was back in June 23rd of 2003, just days after an article appeared online in the New Republic, which quoted some critical commentary from Mr. Wilson. After that discussion with Judith Miller on June 23rd, 2003, Mr. Libby also discussed Valerie Wilson on July 8th of 2003. And during that discussion, Mr. Libby talked about Mr. Wilson in a conversation that was on background as a senior administration official. And when Mr. Libby talked about Wilson, he changed the attribution to a former Hill staffer. During that discussion, which was to be attributed to a former Hill staffer, Mr. Libby also discussed Wilson's wife, Valerie Wilson, working at the CIA. And then finally, again, on July 12th. In short, and in those conversations, Mr. Libby never said, this is something that other reporters are saying. Mr. Libby never said, this is something that I don't know if it's true. Mr. Libby never said, I don't even know if she had a wife. At the end of the day, what appears is that Mr. Libby's story, that he was at the tail end of a chain of phone calls, passing on from one reporter what he heard from another, was not true. It was false. He was at the beginning of the chain of the phone calls, the first official to disclose this information outside the government to a reporter, and that he lied about it afterwards, under oath and repeatedly. Now, as I said before, this grand jury investigation has been conducted in secret. I believe it should have been conducted in secret, not only because it's required by those rules, but because the rules are wise. Those rules protect all of us. We are now going from a grand jury investigation to an indictment, a public charge, and a public trial. The rules will be different. But I think what we see here today, when a vice president's chief of staff is charged with perjury and obstruction of justice, it does show the world that this is a country that takes its law seriously, that all citizens are bound by the law. But what we need to also show the world is that we can also apply the same safeguards to all our citizens, including high officials. Much as they must be bound by the law, we must follow the same rules. So I ask everyone involved in this process, anyone who participates in this trial, anyone who covers this trial, anyone sitting home watching these proceedings, to follow this process with an American appreciation for our values and our dignity. Let's let the process take place. Let's take a deep breath and let justice process the system. I would be remiss at this point if I didn't thank the team of investigators and prosecutors who worked on it, led by Agent Eckenrode, but particularly the staff under John Diam from the Counter-Espionage Section in the Department of Justice, Mr. Zeidenberg from Public Integrity, and as well as the agents from the Washington Field Office and my close friends at the Chicago U.S. Attorney's Office, all of whom contributed to a joint effort. And with that, I'll take questions. Yes, sir.
Mr. Fitzgerald, this began as a leak investigation, but no one is charged with any leaking. Is your investigation finished? Is this another leak investigation that doesn't lead to a charge of leaking?
Let me answer the two questions you asked in one. Okay, is the investigation finished? It's not over, but I'll tell you this. Very rarely do you bring a charge in a case that's going to be tried, and would you ever end a grand jury investigation? I can tell you the substantial bulk of the work in this investigation is concluded. This grand jury's term has expired by statute. It could not be extended, but it's an ordinary course to keep a grand jury open to consider other matters, and that's what we will be doing. Let me then ask your next question. Well, why is this leak investigation that doesn't result in a charge? I've been trying to think about how to explain this, so let me try. I know baseball analogies are the fad these days. Let me try something. If you saw a baseball game and you saw a pitcher wind up and throw a fastball and hit a batter right smack in the head and really, really hurt them, you'd want to know why the pitcher did that. You'd wonder whether or not the person just reared back and decided, I've got bad blood with this batter. He hit 2 home runs off me. I'm just going to hit him in the head as hard as I can. You also might wonder whether or not the pitcher just let go of the ball or his foot slipped and he had no idea to throw the ball anywhere near the batter's head. And there's lots of shades of gray in between. You might learn that you wanted to hit the batter in the back. It hit him in the head because he moved. You might want to throw it under his chin, but end up hitting him in the head. And what you'd want to do is have as much information as you could. You want to know what happened in the dugout. Was this guy complaining about the person he threw at? Did he talk to anyone else? What was he thinking? How does he react? All those things you'd want to know. And then you'd make a decision as to whether this person should be banned from baseball, whether he should be suspended, whether you should do nothing at all and just say, hey, the person threw a bad pitch, get over it. In this case, it's a lot more serious than baseball. And the damage wasn't to one person. It wasn't to Valerie Wilson. It was done to all of us. And as you sit back, you want to learn, why was this information going out? Why were people taking this information about Valerie Wilson and giving it to reporters? Why did Mr. Libby say what he did? Why did he tell Judith Miller 3 times? Why did he tell the press secretary on Monday? Why did he tell Mr. Cooper? And was this something where he intended to cause whatever damage was caused? Or did he intend to do something else? And where are the shades of gray? And what we have when someone charges obstruction of justice is the umpire gets sand thrown in his eyes. He's trying to figure out what happened, and somebody blocked their view. As you sit here now, if you're asking me what his motives were, I can't tell you. We haven't charged it. So what you were saying is the harm in an obstruction investigation is it prevents us from making the very fine judgments we want to make. But I also want to take away from the notion that somehow we should take an obstruction charge less seriously than a leak charge. This is a very serious matter, and compromising national security information is a very serious matter. But the need to get to the bottom of what happened and whether national security was compromised by inadvertence, by recklessness, by maliciousness is extremely important. We need to know the truth. And anyone who would go into a grand jury and lie, obstruct, and impede the investigation has committed a serious crime. I will say this. Mr. Libby is presumed innocent. He would not be guilty unless and until a jury of 12 people came back and returned a verdict saying so. But if what we allege in the indictment is true, then what is charged is a very, very serious crime that will vindicate the public interest in finding out what happened here. Yes, sir.
Mr. Fitzgerald, do you have any evidence that the Vice President of the United States, one of Mr. Libby's original sources for this information, encouraged him to leak it or encouraged him to lie about leaking it?
I'm not making allegations about anyone, nor charging the indictment. Now, let me back up, because I know what that sounds like to people if they're sitting at home. We don't talk about people that are not charged with a crime in the indictment. I would say that about anyone in this room who has nothing to do with the offenses. We make no allegation that the Vice President committed any criminal act. We make no allegation that any of the other people who provided or discussed with Mr. Libby committed any criminal act. But as to any person you ask me a question about other than Mr. Libby, I'm not going to comment on anything. That's not to, please don't take that as any indication that someone has done something wrong. That's a standard practice. If you followed me in Chicago, I say that 1,000 times a year. And we just don't comment on people because we could start telling you, well, this person did nothing wrong, this person did nothing wrong. And then if we stop commenting, then you'll start jumping to conclusions. So please take no more. Mr. Isikoff.
For all the sand thrown in your eyes, it sounds like you do know the identity of the leaker. There's a reference to a senior official at the White House, Official A, who had a discussion with Robert Novak about Joe Wilson's wife. Can you explain why that official was not charged in this indictment?
And I'll explain this. I know that people want to know whatever it is that we know, and they're probably sitting at home at TV thinking, I want to jump through the TV, grab him by his collar, and tell him to tell us everything they figured out over the last 2 years. We just can't do that. It's not because we enjoy holding back information from you. That's the law. And one of the things we do with a grand jury is we gather information, and the explicit requirement is if we're not going to charge someone with a crime, if we decide that a person did not commit a crime, we cannot prove a crime, doesn't merit prosecution, we do not stand up and say we gathered all this information on the commitment that we're going to follow the rules of grand jury secrecy, which say we don't talk about people not charged with a crime, and then at the end say, well, it's a little inconvenient not to give answers out, so I'll give it out anyway. I can't give you answers on what we know and don't know other than what's charged in the indictment. It's not because I enjoy being in that position. It's because the law is that way. I actually think the law should be that way. We can't talk about information not contained in the 4 corners of the indictment. Yes, sir.
Is Karl Rove off the hook, and are there any other individuals who might be charged? You say you're not quite finished.
And all I can say is the same answer I gave before. If you ask me any name, I'm not going to comment on anyone named because we either charge someone or we don't talk about them, and don't read that answer in the context of the name you gave me. Carol.
What can you say about what you're still working on then?
I can't. I mean, let's be, I don't mean that flippantly, but the grand jury doesn't give an announcement about what they're doing, what they're looking at, unless they charge an indictment. I can tell you that no one wants this thing to be over as quickly as I do, as quickly as Mr. Eckenrode does. I'd like to wake up in my bed in Chicago. He'd like to wake up in his bed in Philadelphia. And we recognize that we want to get this thing done. I will not end the investigation until I can look anyone in the eye and tell them that we have carried out our responsibility sufficiently to be sure that we've done what we could to make intelligent decisions about when to end the investigation. We hope to do that as soon as possible. I just hope that people will take a deep breath and and just allow us to continue to do what we have to do.